My sister cleaned out my mother's estate account the morning of the funeral, transferred everything to her own name, and boarded a flight to Scottsdale before the reception was even over. I had nothing left to pay the funeral home. I thought I was going to lose everything my mother had spent 30 years building. Then my 17-year-old nephew looked up from his laptop and said, "Aunt Nadia, don't worry. I already took care of it." 3 days later, my sister called me from a Scottsdale hotel room, absolutely screaming, and I let her scream. Have you ever been the one who held everything together for so long that people stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a resource? Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I want to know who's in this community with me. My name is Nadia. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years I have been the unofficial executor, caretaker, bookkeeper, and emotional support system for my entire family. Not because anyone asked me to take that role, because I was the one who showed up. I'm a paralegal at a mid-size estate law firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, which means I know exactly how inheritance works, exactly what fraud looks like on paper, and exactly how rarely families recover from it. I thought that knowledge would protect me. I was wrong. My mother Ellen was a quiet woman who made herself very loud through decades of careful work. She immigrated from the Philippines in her late 20s, raised 2 daughters in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, and by the time she retired she had accumulated a modest but meaningful estate, a paid-off house in Dilworth, a savings portfolio worth just over $400,000, and a small rental property in Concord that she managed herself until her knees gave out. She had spent 30 years building something real. She trusted both of her daughters equally. That was her only mistake. My older sister Margot is 40 years old and has spent most of those years operating on the assumption that other people exist to manage the consequences of her decisions. She has never held a job longer than 18 months. She has borrowed money from my mother 4 separate times and repaid it 0. She married a man named Tim, who is somehow worse than her, and together they have bounced between Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Scottsdale for the better part of a decade, chasing a version of success that keeps relocating just before they arrive. When my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 14 months ago, I moved into her house. I took FMLA leave from work, coordinated with her oncology team at Atrium Health, drove her to every appointment, managed her medications, and made sure her affairs were in order. I also helped her update her will and estate plan, because that is literally my job, and because my mother deserved to have things done right. She had a detailed trust, a designated healthcare proxy, and a transfer on death deed for the Dilworth house. Everything was clean, everything was documented. Margot came to visit twice during the 14 months, once for Thanksgiving, which she left early, once in March, when she arrived with Tim and immediately began asking my mother about the plan for the house. My mother died on a Tuesday morning in May. She passed at home, which is what she wanted, in her own bedroom with the windows open. I was holding her hand. Margot was on a flight from Scottsdale. She arrived 4 hours after my mother was gone, walked into the house, hugged me for approximately 6 seconds, and then went to find the file cabinet. I was too shattered to process what she was doing. I had just watched my mother take her last breath. I was running on no sleep, and the particular kind of hollow exhaustion that only comes from months of caregiving finally ending. I let Margot move around the house because I couldn't think straight enough to stop her. The funeral was on Friday. I organized everything: the service at the church we grew up in, the reception at the house, the flowers, the programs, the catering. I called my mother's friends, her former co-workers, her neighbors. I wrote her obituary. I stood at the front of that church for 2 hours receiving condolences from people who loved her, and I held it together because someone had to. Margot gave a eulogy. It was 11 minutes long and used the word I 47 times. I counted later, when I needed something to be angry about instead of sad. The reception ended around 4 in the afternoon. I was cleaning up the kitchen when my phone buzzed with an alert from the estate account. It was a joint notification account I had set up so that both my mother's attorney and I would be alerted to any large transactions while the estate was being administered. I almost didn't look at it. I was elbow deep in paper plates and leftover casserole dishes, and I assumed it was a routine alert. It was not routine. The alert showed an outgoing wire transfer from the estate account for $382,000. Destination, a personal checking account in Margot's name at a regional bank in Arizona. Timestamp 10:47 a.m. that morning, 2 hours before the funeral started. I set down the casserole dish very carefully. I dried my hands. I opened my banking app and confirmed what I was seeing. Then I went to the front window and looked out at the driveway, and Margot's rental car was gone. I called her. It went to voicemail. I called Tim. It went to voicemail. I pulled up the airline app on instinct, the one I keep on my phone because I'd booked my mother's medical travel, and I searched Margot's name. There it was. American Airlines, Charlotte to Scottsdale, departing 3:55 p.m. She had booked it 2 days before the funeral. She had come to bury my mother and to rob the estate, and she had scheduled the robbery for the morning of the funeral because she knew I would be too consumed with grief to check my phone. I stood in my mother's kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of her memorial reception, and I felt the floor do something strange beneath me. Not drop out, solidify. Go cold and flat and completely still, the way ground freezes in winter. I have felt grief that made me shake. This made me stop shaking entirely. My nephew Wyatt was in the living room. He was 17, the son of my cousin Briar, who had flown in from Atlanta for the service. Wyatt had been a quiet presence all week, helping me set up folding chairs, carrying food in from cars, sitting with me on the porch the night before the service when I couldn't sleep. He was the kind of kid who noticed things and didn't make noise about it. He was sitting cross-legged on the couch with his laptop, and when I walked into the room he looked at my face and closed the laptop without me saying a word. "What happened?" he said. I told him. I showed him the alert. I showed him the flight information. I watched his expression go through something complicated and come out the other side looking very calm. "Okay," he said. He opened the laptop again. "Give me some time." "Wyatt, this is a legal matter. I need to call the attorney. I need to call the bank." "I know," he said. "I'm not doing anything to the money. I'm just looking at something. Aunt Nadia." He looked up at me over the screen. He had his mother's eyes. "Trust me for an hour." I called the estate attorney Stuart Brennan, who did not answer because it was Friday evening after a funeral, which I completely understood and also completely could not afford in that moment. I left him a message. I called the bank's estate services line and was on hold for 22 minutes before reaching someone who told me that because the account was a joint signature account and Margot had been added as an authorized signatory when she arrived in Charlotte earlier in the week, the transfer was technically authorized and there was nothing they could do until the estate attorney contacted them directly on Monday. Monday, 3 business days away. I sat down on the floor of my mother's hallway, which is not something I had ever done before in my adult life, and I stared at the baseboard she had painted herself years ago, and I thought, she spent 30 years building this, and it is gone in a wire transfer. Wyatt appeared in the hallway doorway after a while. He had a glass of water for me, which he set on the floor next to me without comment. "You want to know what she did?" he asked. "Tell me." "I've been watching her since Tuesday," he said. "She was on her phone a lot, in a way that felt off. She kept stepping outside to take calls, and I could see her screen when she walked past the kitchen. She had the wire transfer portal bookmarked. I figured she was planning something." I stared at him. "You're 17. "My dad works in cybersecurity," he said, which was true. My cousin Bria's husband ran a small security consulting firm. He taught me how to read screens and behavior. People are usually less careful than they think when they're confident they're smarter than everyone around them. "Wyatt." "I didn't touch the estate account," he said. "I want to be really clear about that. But I did set something up around it. 3 days ago, when I noticed what Aunt Margot was doing, I called my dad. He walked me through setting up a passive network monitor on the home Wi-Fi. We weren't intercepting anything. We were just logging. Every device that connected to this network this week, every site visited, every transaction initiated." He handed me his laptop. On the screen was a complete log. Times, IP addresses, URLs. The wire transfer portal accessed from Margot's phone at 7:14 a.m. The transfer initiated at 10:47 a.m. The airline booking site. Tim's phone searching estate asset liquidation timeline Arizona Wednesday night at 11:30 p.m. I also found something else, Wyatt said. He pulled up a second file. She accessed the Concord rental property listing portal on Thursday. She was in the process of listing the property for sale. She'd already contacted a property management company in Concord to change the locks and transfer management authority. My mother's rental property, the one generating $1,200 a month in income, the one that was supposed to be divided equally between Margot and me according to the will. Is any of this admissible? I asked. I was already thinking like a paralegal again. That was the only way I knew how to survive things. My dad says the network log is clean. We own the router, we logged the activity on our own network, no interception of communications, just traffic metadata. He talked to a lawyer friend of his tonight. The logs themselves aren't the evidence, they're the roadmap to the evidence. Every transaction Aunt Margot made left a trail in the bank's own records. We just know exactly where to look and when. I looked at my nephew for a long moment. He was drinking his own glass of water, calm as a stone. There's one more thing, he said. I set up a flag on the Arizona account. My dad knows someone at a fraud monitoring firm that does consulting work for regional banks. He's not inside the bank, he can't touch anything, but he has a contact. The flag isn't in the bank's system. It's on the consulting firm's watch list. The moment that account initiates a transfer over $25,000 to any external account, my dad's contact gets notified. Margot can't move that money out without us knowing exactly where it goes. I looked at the screen, at the timestamps, at the search history that showed my sister and her husband planning this while my mother was being dressed for her own funeral. What do we do now? I asked. You call the attorney Monday morning the second the office opens, Wyatt said. I send all of this to my dad tonight. He compiles it and has it ready to hand to Stuart Brennan Monday morning, along with a formal forensic documentation memo, and we wait for Aunt Margot to try to spend the money. She'll try before Monday, I said. I knew my sister. She was already in Scottsdale. She was already celebrating. I know, Wyatt said. That's what we're counting on. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my mother's bedroom, in the chair by the window where she used to read, and I thought about 30 years of discipline and sacrifice getting walked out the door in a rolling carry-on. I thought about the way Margot had hugged me at the airport years ago, the last time I'd visited her in Phoenix, and told me she loved me, and that I was the only person who had ever believed in her. I had believed in her. I had believed in her. I had also, I realized now, been funding her. Every time I covered a gap in my mother's expenses so Margot didn't have to fly back. Every time I handled a document or a phone call so Margot didn't have to deal with it. I had been making her fraud easier for years without knowing it. My mother used to say that love without limits isn't love, it's an open account. I understood now what she meant. Saturday morning was quiet. Sunday was quieter. I cleaned the house. I sorted my mother's clothing into bags for donation. I watered her plants. Wyatt stayed, helped me, didn't say much. His parents had flown back to Atlanta, but he asked to stay until Monday, and his mother said yes without asking why. Sunday evening, Wyatt's laptop pinged. He was in the kitchen making a sandwich. He crossed the room in 4 steps and looked at the screen and then at me. She's moving, he said. Margot had initiated a transfer of $240,000 to an LLC account registered in Arizona. Wyatt's father's contact had flagged it within 4 minutes. Tim set up the LLC 3 weeks ago, Wyatt said, scrolling through a second alert his father had just sent. It's a shell company. They were planning to receive the money through a corporate account so it would be harder to trace as personal assets. I picked up my phone and called Stuart Brennan. I know it was Sunday night. I know most people don't take those calls. Stuart Brennan took my call because we had worked together for 4 years and because I had left him an extremely detailed voicemail on Friday evening that included the words wire fraud, estate account, premeditated, and she's already in Arizona. He told me he would call the bank's estate litigation line first thing in the morning. He also told me to send him everything Wyatt's father had compiled. We sent it that night. Monday morning at 9:03 a.m. Stuart filed an emergency motion to freeze the estate account and Margot's personal Arizona account, pending investigation of the unauthorized transfer. At 9:47 a.m., the bank's fraud department placed a hold on all outgoing transactions from both accounts while the transfer was under review. The LLC transfer that Margot had initiated Sunday night was suspended mid-processing. It never completed. At 11:15 a.m., Monday, my phone rang. I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I looked at the screen and I said to Wyatt, "She's calling." He looked up from his laptop. "Answer it. Let her talk." I answered. My sister's voice came through the phone like a pressure front. She wasn't crying. She was furious in the particular way that people who know they've done something wrong get furious when they get caught, loud, accusing, completely airless. She told me I had no right to freeze the account. She told me the transfer was legal because she was a signatory. She told me our mother had always intended for her to have that money, because she had suffered more, sacrificed more, needed it more. She told me I was calculating and cold and had turned her nephew against her. She told me I was destroying the family over money. "The family," I said. She kept going. "Margot." I said her name once, in a register that made her stop mid-sentence. "I have a complete log of every action you took on the estate account from Tuesday through Friday. I have your search history on the home network. I have Tim's search history. I have the property management inquiry you filed on Thursday about the Concord rental. I have your flight booking time stamped 2 days before the funeral. I have a forensic documentation memo that is currently in Stuart Brennan's hands. And I have the Sunday evening transfer attempt to the LLC that Tim incorporated 3 weeks ago." A silence. "You planned this before you even got on the plane to Charlotte," I said. "You came to our mother's funeral with a checklist." Her voice, when it came back, was smaller. "Nadia." "I'm not angry," I said, "and I meant it, which I think was the thing that frightened her most. I'm done. There's a difference." I told her Stuart would be in contact about the legal process. I told her to retain an attorney. I ended the call. Wyatt was watching me from across the kitchen. He had the careful, steady expression of someone who has been waiting to see how a thing lands. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm okay enough." The investigation took 11 weeks. The bank's forensic team reviewed the estate account records and confirmed the transfer had been initiated using access that Margot had obtained under false pretenses. She had told my mother's bank that she was the primary administrator of the estate, which was not true, and had been added as a signatory based on that representation. That constituted fraud in the procurement of account access. The North Carolina Attorney General's office opened a case. Stuart filed a civil suit on behalf of the estate to recover the full transferred amount, plus legal costs. Because the money had been frozen before the LLC transfer completed, nearly all of it was still in Margot's Arizona account, untouched. The recovery was almost total. Margot and Tim hired an attorney who spent approximately 6 weeks arguing that the transfer was a misunderstanding, before apparently advising them that misunderstandings don't come with premeditated LLC incorporations and documentary evidence of network activity. They agreed to a settlement that returned the full amount to the estate plus legal fees. The criminal matter is still pending. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney referred the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office because the wire transfer crossed state lines. Wire fraud is a federal offense. Margot and Tim are looking at potential federal charges and are currently residing in Scottsdale, which is where people go when they are waiting for something bad to catch up with them. The Concord rental property is currently generating income as intended. The estate is being administered on the original timeline. I closed on my mother's Dilworth house 6 weeks ago and moved in. My mother planted a rose garden along the back fence that she tended for 11 years. The roses came back this spring without anyone touching them. Wyatt started his senior year in August. He got early admission to Georgia Tech in November. His acceptance letter listed his intended major as computer science and cybersecurity. I cried when Briar sent me a photo of him holding the letter, which is not something I do easily. My sister has not contacted me since the Monday phone call. I have not contacted her. There is a particular kind of grief that comes after betrayal, and it is different from other grief because it goes backward in time. It doesn't just hurt now. It reruns every memory and makes you wonder what was real. Every holiday, every phone call, every loan my mother made that was called a gift because asking for repayment was causing drama. I have spent months going back through those memories and renegotiating my understanding of them, which is painful in a specific and necessary way, like resetting a bone. My mother was not naive. I think she knew on some level who Margot was. I think she loved her anyway, the way people love things they cannot fix, fully and at enormous cost. That was her choice to make. I do not judge it, but I am done paying for it. The last thing my mother said to me that I understood clearly was on a Sunday morning about 3 weeks before she died. She was having a better day, sitting up, and we were drinking coffee in her bedroom, and she took my hand and said, "You've always known how to hold things together. Just make sure you also know how to let go." I thought she was talking about grief, about losing her. I think now she might have known more than I gave her credit for. I live in her house now. I drink my coffee in her chair by the window. Wyatt calls me every Sunday. The roses came back. I am still learning what letting go looks like, when the thing you're letting go of was never really yours to carry. But I am learning, and for the first time in 6 years, I am only carrying my own weight. I keep thinking about that boarding pass stub my mother never saw. Margot had it in her bag before my mother even took her last breath. That is the detail I come back to, not the wire transfer, not the LLC, not the federal charges, just that stub, folded in a pocket, already printed, already dated, already pointing away from everything my mother had built. There is a version of this story where I tell you that people like Margot simply get away with it, and for a long time I believe they did. I watched my mother absorb decades of her oldest daughter's failures, the borrowed money, the missed calls, the excuses that arrived reliably in place of effort, and I told myself this was just how some families worked. You carry the ones who won't carry themselves, and you call it love, and you keep going. What I did not understand until I was sitting on that hallway floor, staring at my mother's hand-painted baseboards, is that the carrying was never invisible to the people being carried. They knew. They simply decided that your willingness to hold the weight was permission to add more. What stopped Margot was not luck. It was not the law, not first. It was Wyatt, a 17-year-old who paid attention when everyone else was too consumed by grief to look up. He had no power, no authority, no access to anything my sister didn't also have access to. What he had was integrity and a sharp enough mind to use it precisely. He watched, he documented, he called his father, he waited. He didn't act out of anger or revenge. He acted out of a quiet, clear-eyed understanding that the right thing required doing, and that doing it required thinking before moving. That combination, good character fused with genuine intelligence, is not something you can manufacture in a crisis. It is something you build slowly, in ordinary moments, long before you need it. I think about that a lot now. How Wyatt's father spent years teaching him to read behavior and systems, not as a defensive skill, but as a matter of paying careful attention to the world. How Wyatt sat on a porch with me at midnight the week of the funeral, and didn't say anything useful, just stayed. How when the moment came that required both his head and his conscience, he had both ready. Nobody handed him those things, he built them. And I think about my own part in what happened, the years I spent managing my mother's affairs, covering gaps, staying quiet to keep the peace. I did those things out of genuine love, but I also did them in a way that never required Margot to change. I was so focused on holding things together that I made it easy for things to fall apart. Endurance without boundaries isn't strength. I know that now in a way I could not have learned any other way. My mother is gone. Her roses came back anyway, which I take as something, though I won't tell you exactly what. What I know is that I am still here, in her house, with her chair by the window. Wyatt calls on Sundays. The estate is intact, and for the first time in a very long time, I wake up in the morning without a knot behind my sternum, without the low-grade dread of waiting for the next thing I will be asked to absorb. You cannot outrun what you owe the world, but you also cannot keep paying a debt that was never yours.